You're dialed in to the Here We Go Rapid Review. Audio programming with slides that you can look at now or never. Keep commuting, keep exercising, keep crafting, but don't stop learning law. It's UCC Article 2, Contracts for the Sale of Goods, Performance, and Breach. Here we go.
Let's talk about performance and breach. Performance and breach. First up, anticipatory repudiation. Anticipatory repudiation. If one party repudiates the contract, the other party can suspend its performance and cancel the contract. You have a contract to buy a car and the other party says, you know what? I'm not going to deliver that car that I contracted to deliver to you. Well, at that point, you can suspend your performance, you can cancel the check, and not go through with the contract. That's pretty easy. Next, if one party has reasonable grounds for insecurity, then that party can demand adequate assurances. So we had a contract that you were going to deliver a bunch of plywood to my house, and I went to your store. You were going to deliver that on Saturday, and I went to your store on Thursday, and there was no plywood in the store, and I talked to some people there. They're like, yeah, we can't find plywood anywhere. It's a crisis. That's reasonable grounds for me to be insecure that you're going to be able to make this plywood delivery on Saturday. So in a case where one party has reasonable grounds for insecurity, that party can demand adequate assurances. They demand adequate assurances. If the demanding party, at that point, they are then permitted to suspend performance until adequate assurances are provided. I can suspend my payments until I get adequate assurances. If adequate assurances are not provided within a reasonable time, 30 days maximum, then the party failing to provide those assurances is deemed to have repudiated the contract. And in that case, the aggrieved party is now permitted to cancel the contract. Time to talk about a pitfall with anticipatory repudiation. You should be aware of the danger of one party claiming the other party repudiated the contract and then canceling the contract on that basis. Where party A cancels a contract on the basis of a claimed repudiation by party B, and that supposed repudiation is later judged by a court to not have been a true repudiation, then party A is held to have repudiated the contract and therefore breached it. So if I'm going to say you repudiated the contract, therefore I'm not going to perform, I can't be wrong. Because if I make a mistake and think you repudiated and it turns out you didn't, then I'm the one who breached. Which is why the demand for adequate assurances under the UCC is there. You don't have to be all in. You could say, oh, I think maybe you're repudiating and won't be able to deliver, so I'm going to demand adequate assurances. Safer course. Then, if you don't get the adequate assurances, then you're on sure footing for canceling your performance under the contract. Otherwise, you claim that the other party repudiated and you don't perform, you're taking a risk that the judge is going to see it the same way you do. Now, let's talk about what can a buyer do when there are non-conforming goods. You ordered 1,000 8-foot lengths of 2x4s, pine, and you got a bunch of worm-eaten 2x2s made out of some substandard wood. Okay, so you got non-conforming goods. Hey, this isn't what I ordered. What a buyer can do for non-conforming goods, I want you to think about it chronologically as proceeding in 3 stages. There's kind of 3 points where you can jump off the train. So it starts out easy for the buyer, and then it gets, as we progress through time, harder for the buyer to do anything. So ordered chronologically, the buyer can reject. If they don't reject, then later they might be able to revoke. If they don't revoke, later they might be able to sue for breach of warranty. So first, reject. Next, revoke. Finally, sue for breach of warranty. But note that things are different for installment contracts. If there's multiple deliveries, installment contracts have their own rules, and there's no perfect tender rule for installment contracts. If you got an installment contract, then go look it up. Let's talk about this, non-installment contracts, the 3 stages: chance to reject, chance to revoke, chance to sue for breach of warranty. So first, reject. Within a reasonable time, and by giving notice, you can reject goods because they aren't perfect. If you order goods and there's something slightly off about it, you can reject it, even if it'd be reasonable for you to keep it. Like you ordered a car that's got all these features, and one of them was that the wheels had to have 8 little spokes instead of 7. And you're like, well, no, that's not quite what I ordered. Like, no one's going to notice. Maybe this is the spare wheel that no one even sees. And it's like, let's say it's even a cheap part. It's like a $70 part of a $50,000 car, but it's not exactly what you ordered. You're like, I reject the whole car. Now I'm not taking it. You can do that. That's what's called the perfect tender rule. Tender's got to be perfect, or you could just reject it. It's very powerful for the buyer. Okay, a seller has a right to cure under 2 circumstances. One, if there's still time under the contract to make a conforming delivery. Like I said, I was going to get you that car on Saturday. I delivered the non-conforming car on Friday. I still have a day to get you the conforming car. Or if the seller had some reason to believe that a non-conforming good would be acceptable, like, well, you said last night you didn't really care about the spare tire, then you'd have a right to cure. Otherwise, you can reject just because the goods aren't exactly perfectly what you ordered. That's the perfect tender rule. Okay, if the buyer doesn't reject, and that's something you have to do right away when you get the goods. If you don't reject the goods, you let them sit there. Then the buyer has accepted the goods. Once you've accepted the goods, then the buyer can't reject, and the buyer will have to pay up. But at that point, maybe the buyer can revoke. That's our next stage. So maybe the buyer can revoke, but it's a little bit harder to revoke than reject. So let's look at revoke. Within a reasonable time and with notice, you can revoke acceptance because, number one, the non-conformance substantially impairs the value of the contract. So there's got to be a big non-performance. Not because the spare tire wasn't exactly what I ordered, but something's really off that now the value of the contract has been substantially impaired. So it's got to be a big thing, not a mere imperfection. So number one, the non-conformance substantially impairs the value of the contract. And number two, one of 3 things. So you got to have substantially impair the value of the contract and one of these 3 things. Either the buyer thought the seller would cure. That's why I waited. That's why I didn't reject. I thought you were going to cure. So the buyer thought the seller would cure, or the seller gave assurances that strung the buyer out. So the seller said, yeah, I could fix that part. Just hold your horses on that. Don't rush me. So if the buyer's been strung out, or there was some reason the buyer couldn't discover the non-conformance before accepting. So you accept your new car, and you think it's a flex fuel vehicle that runs on ethanol, but you're down in Texas where they only have gasoline, and it's not until you drive up to somewhere in the upper Midwest that you get to an ethanol fueling station, you put it in, and the car stops working. You're like, now I've discovered it doesn't work on ethanol. Okay, so that'd be a reason I couldn't discover the non-conformance before accepting. Once time has passed for revocation, then all the buyer can do maybe is sue for breach of warranty. So let's look at breach of warranty. You can sue for breach of warranty if all the requirements of a warranty action are met. If a breach of warranty action won't work, then you're out of luck. So you ordered something, it came, it wasn't exactly what you ordered, but you let it sit there, and you knew about it, and you passed your time to reject, and you didn't have grounds for revoking, and the warranties were all disclaimed, you're out of luck. So in a sense, it's kind of like, it works like the statute of limitations, but sort of right away. And the thing is, the UCC figures, once you ordered something, you got the goods, you saw they weren't what you ordered, you either got to reject that or it is what it is. If you'd like all that stuff I talked about, reject, revoke, sue for breach of warranty, on one page, there's a handout I have online for that.